It's never good for you to have that stress arousal for longer than 3 minutes. I hadn't planned to watch Squid Game, and it's chronic stressful to watch Squid Games, or you can do it in moderation. Maybe watch one episode, or maybe watch one season, but don't watch all three, or don't binge watch Squid Games. You can only take so much.
안녕하세요. 전 세계 화제의 책과 저자를 깊이 있게 들여다보는 시간, 스텔라의 북인사이트 스텔라입니다. 이 건강은 모두의 관심사죠. 뭘 먹고 뭘 하고 어떻게 몸을 챙겨야 건강하게 잘 지낼 수 있을지 이 남녀노소 세대를 불문한 중요한 화두니까요. 건강한 삶에 관심이 많아지다 보니까 뭘 먹어야 된다, 뭘 먹지 말아야 된다는 기본이고 이 생활 환경, 수면 퀄리티, 저속 노화 얘기도 많이 하죠. 그런데 오늘 함께 이야기 나눠볼 이 저자는 조금 다른 이야기를 합니다. 이 사회가 정의로워야 진짜 건강할 수 있다라고 얘기를 하거든요. 아무리 잘 먹고 잘 쉬고 건강한 습관을 유지해도 이 사회나 조직, 회사, 학교의 시스템이 공정하지 못하다면 여기서 오는 스트레스가 건강을 위협한다라는 얘기인데요. 이게 무슨 얘기인지, 이 불평등은 어떻게 몸을 갉아먹는가? 그럼 지금부터 미국 미시간 대학의 공공보건학자 제로니머스 교수와 함께 사회적 스트레스와 건강에 대해서 이야기를 나눠보겠습니다. Today we invited Dr. Gerominus. Hi, Arlene.
안녕하세요.
Hi, that's very nice. That's very nice. To begin with, can you introduce yourself and say hello to our Korean audience?
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
I'm Dr. Arlene Geroninmus. I'm a professor of health behavior and health equity at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. I'm also a member of the National Academy of Medicine, of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States. And I'm very happy to be here today.
Great. We're very happy to have you here. Before we get into the specifics of your book, I want to establish that inequality is a global concern, not just limited to the United States. So for your information, I've done my PhD at Washington University in St. Louis. So from my perspective, I found your idea pretty interesting. But for many Korean viewers, especially those who are not familiar with American society or American healthcare system, they may raise some questions like, how does the idea relate to Korea, relates to me? So maybe we'd better talk about why this issue matters to us, especially matters to Koreans. So what is health inequality and why does this topic matter?
Health inequality is where identifiable populations in a country have different life expectancies, different healthy life expectancies. In fact, from the work I do, actually age molecularly at different rates. But it's not due to anything inherent in the people or genetic. It's all structurally rooted in the ways that people in different groups face different lived experiences, different amounts of resources, different environments of various kinds. And also in the United States, unlike in much of the rest of the world, have very different access to healthcare services. Not everybody has health insurance. Those of us who do predominantly have it through a private market. There are also a variety of other barriers, especially in very poor rural areas, where hospitals have been closing and may even be closing more often given what's happening in our economy. So I understand in Korea, though that issue per se is not front and center, although whether you can get to the health services isn't the only thing. The reason I think Koreans and everybody across the world might find my work applicable or of interest is because my work is mainly concerned not so much with what happens if you can get to a hospital once you're already sick. It's about who gets sick, who gets more sick more often, and how that relates to the social structure of your society. And I know that there's great inequality in South Korea. I know I've certainly gotten some pretty extreme images of it through Squid Games or Parasite. I don't know how accurate those are about the real Korea, South Korea. But I also know just historically that there is economic. Some groups are more dominant. Some are more stigmatized. Some have more opportunities. And easier access to income and resources, and also just status. So assuming, that we're all human, weathering could theoretically happen to anybody who is exposed to and treated in the same kind of oppressive or marginalizing way as the groups I've studied in the United States. Even though we claim and our ideal is that we're all equal, the reality is we have these structural differences in who's valued, how much they're valued, how worthy they're seen, and that this affects everything about their lives, but also their health in countless and consequential ways.
So can I summarize your idea? It's a long book. The structural problem in society actually affects the people's health, and the stress is the key word.
The structurally rooted stressors. So it's not just the individual stress. It's not my just saying, oh, I've had such a stressful day, or I'm so crazy busy, or this stresses me out. It's the ways that your position in a society that's unequal makes your ordinary everyday life more or less stressful in ways that affect your biology.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about that stress, different type of stress, a little bit later. Before that, it is my understanding that scholars, including me, tend to dig into the topic that they sincerely care about. So how much does this health inequality matter to you, and why?
It's central to my life, and I'm very passionate about it. And I think, how did that come to be? I don't know if I have a full answer, but part of the answer is I grew up when the United States was going through its civil rights movement. I was born during the Jim Crow era, which was a time in the United States where in the South, Black Americans were not allowed to vote. They had no right to vote. They couldn't even drink from the same water fountains as white people. We've made some great advances through the civil rights movement, but there are other ways where some of the same cultural themes that go all the way back to slavery are still affecting how we view things and who gets stigmatized and who gets valued. I think that's what ignited in me, at least on a conscious level. And while consciously I would point to that sort of fundamental interest in civil rights in the United States as what led me here, I've realized as I've gotten older that my own grandparents, they were political refugees and immigrants to America. My parents, their children, were raised in working class homes and were part of a group of refugees or immigrants who were heavily stigmatized. And so I actually think that, at least on an unconscious level, and now it's come to consciousness, I've also been drawn to this because I saw the ways that my parents and grandparents had suffered and weathered themselves, despite, in my parents' case, they had been socioeconomically mobile. They both had advanced degrees. I grew up in a nice school system in a nice town, in a nice house. Not at the extremes of wealth or anything, but a secure and middle class. And yet both my parents died, relatively young. My mother when I was a child, my father when I was barely an adult. Their siblings were rampant with diabetes, obesity, a variety of other illnesses. And so I've, over the last maybe decade, I've been working on this stuff for over 40 years, but in the last decade, I've come to realize that what I thought I was discovering about another group of people was actually the story of my parents and grandparents, and to a very lesser extent to me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe that's why I felt some empathy throughout your book. Yeah, I can see that. So let's start with the title. The Korean edition has a title with a slightly softer tone, but when I look at the American cover, the title has a stronger message, I think, weathering the extraordinary stress of ordinary life in an unjust society. So what does that mean?
It means that people who are in marginalized or stigmatized populations, that their ordinary lives are chronically very stressful, and that impacts their bodies in ways that leads to their sort of accelerated aging and to getting multiple chronic health conditions and being way more susceptible to infectious disease at younger ages. I called it weathering for two reasons. Because on the one hand, I wanted to highlight that if you're in a lower social position in a society, you get weathered by all the micro and macro aggressions, by even the environment, because at least in the United States, there's environmental racism and places where people of color live, and even the schools where their children go to are riddled with air pollution, with lead pollution, in the schools, mold. And so that kind of weathering was sort of like you're just exposed and you're hit by so many different environmental, material, and even just sort of spiritual assaults on yourself, and that induces a stress reaction that I'll talk about later. But I also wanted to call it weathering, and it's very important to me, this part, because I came to believe, and I think this may be partially from thinking about my parents' and grandparents' biographies, that many people put in those positions try to weather them. They actually engage. They try to overcome all these problems. They try to continue to be able to feed their children or to go to school and get higher education, however hard it is. That's sort of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, that is what allowed, for example, my parents to get advanced degrees. But on the other hand, I think it may have also been part of why they died young through weathering. And so I wanted weathering to kind of say that weathering is both the high effort and very positive and very hopeful coping done by members of marginalized groups, but also the amount of assaults that come at them and weather them the same way a rock is weathered by too much, rain over thousands of millions, even of years. Many people have come to the conclusion that stress is bad for your health, but I think they do think about it just on an individual level, and that it's just about being too busy or a little burnt out or not having enough vacation days, and that they can learn to manage it. We even have courses here in stress management, that it's something you can become mindful, you can meditate, you can do all these things, maybe even eat well and exercise, and that will not only be good for, your body, but it will also help you be less stressed. Whereas the kinds of stressors I'm talking about, as I said, are chronic and an individual cannot manage them. In fact, our system is so rigged against certain types of people or groups of people that there's no way to avoid stress. Your body is put into a state of physiological stress arousal. It's not just sort of an existential, I feel stressed, but it's a literal biological process that if you experience that on a chronic level, it will wear down your body systems, your organs, your tissues, your immune system, your metabolic system, your neuroendocrine system, and that will all lead to an earlier aging and a greater susceptibility to all sorts of health problems. If you add to that not having access to healthcare when you get those health problems, then that exponentiates the ways it affects your quality of life and ultimately your life expectancy.
So you're saying that dominant explanation for health disparities is through like genetics, lifestyle, or some access to healthcare, but you argue that these factors alone don't fully explain the picture.
And in the other issues, it can only do so much. And even healthcare is what we would call in public health tertiary prevention. It's you're already sick before you get the health care. So you haven't saved your body from being eroded and worn down, but you might be able to save your life or get some treatments for whatever illnesses you have. So healthcare can be the difference between life and death, but it's not going to prevent you from weathering in the first place.
I see. So when discussing weathering, you've connected it with allostatic load, the idea that repeated stress accumulates in our body and causes biological wear and tear. So you also explored this in your, like, if I remember correctly, 2006 study. How are these two concepts theoretically linked, and how does allostatic load help us better understand weathering?
Okay. The way I see it is that allostatic load is the biological mechanism of weathering. Weathering is much bigger than allostatic load. So as you noted, allostatic load is a way we can measure through a variety of laboratory tests how much your body has been worn down by chronic stress. Allostatic load tells us how weathering affects our bodies and leads to accelerated aging. It also gives us a way to measure it in research. So we can actually quantify whether this group or that group has experienced stress-mediated wear and tear. But weathering is the much bigger social and structural dynamics that causes all of the chronic stress and leads to having a high allostatic load. What chronic stress is not just occasional, acute, and finite periods of stress, but it is continuous, constant, repeated stress. And the reason that wears down your body is your stress response, which is really the human stress response is a beautiful thing. And it's probably how we've lived, survived as long as we have as a species. But it's meant to only come into play when you're faced with an immediate sort of either actual life or death situation or a reason to be suspicious you might be in one. And then what happens is you just automatically, your body goes into physiological stress arousal. It floods your body with stress hormones. And what they do is they selectively send blood and oxygen to the muscles in your body that are going to help you fight or flee. So your heart will start beating harder. Your breath, you'll breathe harder. Your muscles in your legs will get more blood and oxygen so they can run faster. And so that you can get away from, say, that raging beast that's coming after you or that you think might be coming after you because you heard something that made you vigilant. As soon as you become vigilant is when you start having this major stress arousal. But what a lot of people don't understand is the stress arousal system does several other things. While it's sending a lot of blood and oxygen to the large muscles, it's keeping oxygen and blood away from other tissues and organs in your body. So they're losing nutrients. The other thing that stress arousal does is it kind of mobilizes immune cells from where you store them, so that if you, say, get hurt by the raging beast but not killed, maybe you won't get an infection. Maybe you'll heal more quickly because your immune system's all ready to go. It also pulls a lot of fat cells out of your system, so that you'll have a lot of energy to help fuel the large muscles. So we're well adapted to something like this when it lasts for about 3 minutes. You have this great burst of stress arousal, and then you either flee or survive the attacker, or you're dead. One of those two things happens and it's over. And your body, if you survive, your body systems go back, the immune cells go back, the sugar, you also have released a lot of sugar for energy into your blood system. The sugar goes back. The fat cells go back to storage sites. But if you are chronically physiologically aroused, and that's what I am saying marginalized people are likely to be, and poor people are likely to be, then your system is flooded with immune cells that have nowhere to go and nothing to so they just cause inflammation and plaque. You have the fat cells, you have the sugar cells, you have some of your organs. And as I said, if you're pregnant, your fetus is not getting enough nutrients. At the same time, you're over exercising your heart so you can get an enlarged heart. Just like any muscle you exercise will get larger. Over time, some of these body systems will just go kaput. And if that doesn't kill you itself, it does mean the next infection you get, you can't mobilize your immune system. Inflammation is very unhealthy and it can lead to cancers. Being subjected to this stress arousal on a chronic basis just sets you up for almost every kind of chronic and infectious disease, and it accelerates your aging at the molecular level because your cells can only divide so many times. And as you wear down your organs and tissues and vessels, your damaged cells need to replenish themselves. And that repair work will mean that they will die sooner, the cells themselves, because they can only replicate so many times. There's what's called the end replication problem.
I see. So simply put, so this is a stress level that we feel normally, but there are some people whose switch is always on and their stress level is chronically higher than the other people.
Always vigilant. Then their resistance gets less and less, so that, maybe when you're 20 and you're dealing with the chronic stress, you're still pretty resilient to it, but by the time you're even just 30 or 35 or 40, your body systems have been worn down enough that even with all your best efforts and all your eating well and all your meditating, you're not going to be able to undo all the harm or keep the harm from even happening more.
Let's see. So so there is some group of people who experience chronical stress arousal. And as you get older, you have to be more careful about the stress level.
Right. I mean, it's never good for you to have that stress arousal for longer than 3 minutes. So then it kind of accumulates and accumulates and accumulates as you age. You become more worn out and less healthy with every passing year.
I see. South Korea has one of the highest suicide rates and the lowest birth rate among OECD countries. And our concerns about income inequality remains a pressing issue in the society. From your perspective, in terms of weathering, how might the concept weathering help us better understand or even address the structural challenges in Korea?
I have some thoughts on that. I'm obviously not deeply knowledgeable in the Korean context. But I'll start with the suicide part. As your neuroendocrine system gets worn down and as you're in chronic stress arousal, that means your cognitive processes get shut down and your affective neurological processes come to the fore because you need that fear and vigilance, and you need to be able to just act on the fear without having to first think, this lion's coming after me. Should I do something or not? And what should I do? You have to just automatically get scared and act, and with the physiological stress arousal. So if you're chronically stressed, one of the things that happens is those parts of your brain that are the affective regions get bigger while your more cognitive parts get smaller. So it affects your ability to learn, and it can lead to a lot of anxiety, depression, and therefore suicide. So in some ways, the weathering of your neuroendocrine system can lead to suicide. Also, to the extent, and I know this is true here, I don't know how it applies to Korea, to the extent you've been led to believe that if you work hard and play by the rules, you will be successful and you have the agency to do it. As you get older, you start finding that's not true. As you start seeing that the system's more rigged than that and much less equal than that, or fair or just, that can be very depressing too. And I actually thought, this may be a digression, but when I watched Squid Games, I did think that was an interesting metaphor for what happens even in the United States, for how well-meaning, hardworking people who do their best to be future-oriented and disciplined and take care of others end up finding out they weren't ever equal, and they didn't get a fair shot at surviving or being healthy. It was all just, a rigged system, in the same way that it's not random who gets to be a player in the Squid Games and who gets to be, the VIPs who get to bet on players.
So you know the details of Squid Game. That means that you watched the Squid Game.
Yes, I did. It was fairly traumatic, but I wouldn't have usually watched it. But actually, I watched it when I heard my book was being translated in Korean. I thought, and I had watched Parasite before that, just because it had gotten such acclaim. But I hadn't planned to watch Squid Games because I had heard it had this incredible violence and death everywhere. And it's chronic stressful to watch Squid Games. But certainly for the players there, they were under round the clock vigilance, chronic stress, both in their real lives, and when they went to be supposedly equal in this supposedly fair game.
So, maybe we can use it as a YouTube title that watching the Squid Game may accelerate your aging.
Exactly. Or you could do it in moderation. Maybe watch one episode or maybe watch one season, but don't watch all three. Or don't binge watch Squid Games. You can only take so much and find that, if you get stressed for one episode of Squid Games, maybe you can recover. But if you keep watching it, then it becomes chronic.
So after hearing what you said, I wanted to talk about the solution for the problem. Maybe we can approach it in two ways, individual solution and a solution at the societal level. What do you think? What can we do about it?
Well, I think I guess I'll start with the individual level, although, as I said, that's not going to get rid of this. It might make it be a little less, but it's not going to get rid of it. But at an individual level, if you know about this process, there's a few things you can do. You can try to do as best you can, given the resources you have.
Meditation doesn't help at all?
eating as healthy as you can, getting exercise, meditating, all those individual behaviors that people have exaggerated in importance, but still they could matter. But in the end, you can only do so much, and you're only helping yourself with not the greater social issues that will affect your loved ones or other people you identify with or other major contributors to your society. So the structural solutions are really necessary. But they're obviously hard, but what I like to think is chronic stress is everywhere. And so to the extent we can either directly change those structures or at least be aware that those are the causes so we can figure out ways to change them or not let them harm us as much.
Right. Well, I want to change the tone a little bit, and I like to share a bit of optimism here. So I like to talk about the possibilities for change. So, for example, like these days, many people are turning to AI tools for like emotional support, changing my behavior. Like maybe we can use this for like stress relief. In your view, could such technologies play a meaningful role in reducing social isolation, social maybe discrimination, stress, and ultimately health disparities?
I think that's worth considering, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. And for every way you might imagine that AI could make life less lonely or stressful, you can think of ways it's another chronic assault. In the social media or the trolling that people do or the seeing everybody else is so happy and has such a wonderful life and you don't, or recognize in terms of isolation, recognizing that you're not having real relations with real people if you're just dealing with an app on your phone that, asks a few rote questions on that you might be depressed. So I think maybe there are ways they could be improved to be more helpful, but we also have to think about all the ways they might also be a source of physiological stress arousal themselves. What I do think is interesting about these devices and the AI revolution and all is for research. If we're trying to figure out, well, how much of this weathering is because you're breathing too much lead, and how much of it is because you actually are going through stress arousal. Those kinds of things can be measured and quantified with some of the devices that already exist, and maybe even with some machine learning tools. So we could get more precise in our understanding of what it is about everyday life.
So you think that for the purpose of monitoring the health conditions and stress levels, AI can be useful?
Yes, I think it could also be harmful. So it all depends how it gets used. But
yeah, because the technology always have like a good side and bad side. So the reason I was very attracted to entrepreneurship is because entrepreneurs always think that we can do something. We can do something for the society. We can do something for the people. So I think we can find a solution in the long term, but right now we have to focus on this kind of chronic stress so this is a standard question for this program. I really like it as it captures your unique perspective. So in the next 10 years, what do you think will remain unchanged and what will change most dramatically?
Oh, that's a tough one. Because if you'd asked me this 2 years ago, I would have thought a lot of things were changing. It seems like between COVID and some of the policies to deal with climate change and energy efficiency and other things, that we were headed in America toward a more equal and more healthy for all, and more people willing to engage in the work it takes. But now, this year, where so many of those policies have been rescinded and others, especially with immigrants, have been made much worse. And I mean, beyond what we ever could have imagined. I sort of have to hold out to see, is this a blip, a horrible blip on the screen, but people will come back to being, more democratic, more empathetic, more, caring about the earth and their children and their future generations? Or is this somehow going to lock us into a situation that we can't get out of easily at all? So I can't begin to guess, but I am very hopeful. I mean, I wouldn't have done this work all these years if I didn't think ultimately we would reach an understanding that could lead to solutions. And I do think the human spirit, outside of Squid Games anyway, wants to be hopeful. And I think even weathered people are very hopeful. That's why they keep coping and keep doing the, night shifts and the poorly paid work and the dangerous work that some of them do just to be able to feed their children. But I'm not sure anymore that we are hopeful enough, or that there won't be so much damage done by what's happening in our country and to the planet that it will just get worse.
Yeah, but still, there is like entrepreneurship deep inside of my mind. So when I hear that, there's this fluctuation. But in the long term, if we focus on the important problems, and if we focus on how to solve this in the long term, then we will like converge to in a good way. If there is one more thing you want to say to Korean readers, can you say?
Not really. I just wish you all very well. I know, you're also dealing with issues of inequality and immigration. And if there's anything you read in the book or learn from this interview or whatever can help you wrap your mind around those things in a way that could lead to justice or just even health, more equitable health across populations, I hope you can make that happen.
So one of my favorite podcasts is Freakonomics. And I like the closing comment from Stefan Dubner. He says, like, take care, and if you can, take care of others. That's my favorite line.
Absolutely.
Can you say that to our Korean audience? I think it really fits your message.
All our fates are linked. Take care of yourselves, but also take care of others, and also work together in solidarity with others to all make the world a healthier place for everyone.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for your interest.
오늘의 북인사이트 어떠셨나요? 스트레스가 높은 이런 상태가 오래 유지되거나 혹은 자주 오면 우리의 건강을 위협한다. 그리고 사회적인 편견이나 차별, 불공정한 제도로 이런 스트레스를 좀 더 자주 오래 경험하는 사람들이 있더라라는 얘기였는데요. 이 마지막에 촬영이 끝나고 저자와 이야기를 좀 나눴는데 왜 이런 연구를 하세요? 라고 여쭤봤더니 세상은 사람들과 함께 살아가는 거니까요 라는 얘기를 하더라고요. 내가 주도적으로 선택할 수 있는 경험도 있지만 우리가 사회의 동료, 이웃과 함께 만들어가는 이 사회적인 경험이 있다는 얘기를 하고 싶었던 게 아닐까 싶습니다. 그럼 스텔라의 북인사이트 다음 시간에도 인사이트 가득한 인터뷰로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 이 새 코너라서 알라딘 망건당TV 제작진과 함께 정성껏 만들고 있어요. 좋아요와 응원의 댓글 부탁드립니다. 우리 여기서도 자주 오래 봐요.